You're tuned in to the Zelos podcast. I'm your host, Rocky Snyder. Thanks for listening. We've got a great guest this week, Marcus Ward. He's with the Leicester City Women's Football Club. That's right. We're going to the UK and talking all about physical performance. But before we get underway, remember, I've got a website, rockysnyder.com, where you can get continuing education. There's blogs, there's podcast archives, and a whole bunch more. So if you're an athletic trainer, physical therapist, strength coach, heck, even a chiropractor, you can get something out of there. Plus, my book, Return to Center, Strength Training to Realign the Body, Recover from Pain, and Achieve Optimal Performance. You can get it there. Setanta College is actually where I'm getting some studies. I'm getting my Master's of Science in Sports Injury and Return to Performance, but they also have tracks on performance coaching, applied sports, biomechanics, and movement science, as well as applied sport and exercise psychology. So just go to setantacollege.com. You can enter my code RS10 for 10% off tuition, setantacollege.com. And while you're at it, check out Instagram at Rocky_Snyder. Click the subscribe button. Enjoy the show. Well, Marcus, thanks for coming on Zelos Podcast. I know with the time, the difference in time zones here, we're 8 hours apart. So you're probably getting ready for dinner. You've had a long day. So I can't thank you enough for just putting a little time aside to just give us your story and so on. So first, welcome to Zelos.
Pleasure. Thank you very much, Rocky. Good to be here. Really good to speak to you.
Well, it's great to speak to you too, because, well, your team, Leicester City FC, the women's first team, well, the organization's been around. I guess last year you celebrated your 20th anniversary, right? The inception of the club was 2004. And so, relatively young in terms of the women's soccer or football, however we'll label it. I'll probably go back and forth between them, so you'll forgive me for that. But I'm definitely going to want to talk about the youth of women in this sport itself and how that carries over into the work that you do. But first, give us a little bit of an understanding in the next few minutes here as to how you got to be at Leicester City and your path and how you, if you will, stumbled into strength conditioning and so on.
Yeah, of course. So I like many people in this profession, just loved sport growing up, really. Played it, followed it. I guess mainly football in this country, cricket as well. Again, just sort of played multiple sports and just enjoy being active, really. I guess had the dream, as many people do, of being professional. In my case, it was trying to be professional in cricket, but was not quite at that level. And then I remember I just found out about sport and exercise science as a university degree and wanted to pursue that. So I had a finished education, went and had a gap year, which was completely unrelated. It was just working at a school in Australia. It was an amazing life experience, just for sort of growing up and maturing was huge. And then went to university. First studied at Nottingham Trent University in the East Midlands, sport and exercise science. And fortunately, it included a placement year, a sandwich year, and I was fortunate to get a year-long placement with the Nottingham Forest men's soccer team. Working
that must have been
year.
exciting.
It was incredible. Just to be at that level, and again, like being up to that point of on the outside and following professional football, and suddenly to be on the inside of it, it was really good fun, really, really cool experience, and you just learn so much. I was fortunate, I had two people there, guys called Chris Thorpe and Nathan Beardsley, the S&C coach and sports scientist, and they were great to work under. They really supported me, and I just learned so much from that year. It was an amazing experience. Went back and sort of continued studies, and then during this time became aware of the Nottingham Forest women's team, who were at this time amateur, so people who'd have jobs, studies during the day, train a couple of nights in a week, and then play at weekends. And through some contacts, managed to get involved with them, just sort of helping out or just doing warm-ups to begin with. And then fortunately, the timing was such that the club was trying to push the women's team and give it more resources, give it more funding, and really develop that area of the club. And it coincided well with me being around that time. And yes, it was volunteering to begin with, but over the years, it did become paid. during this time as well, did a master's at Loughborough, really one of the top sport universities in this country, doing a master's in exercise physiology. And I remember it was actually during this time, and as I was doing more with the women's team and starting to do programs and stuff on strength and conditioning area in particular became more apparent to me, and things around the accreditation with UKSAA and this area. So fortunately with the Forest women's team, it was free reign pretty much to sort of do what I wanted, which was, looking back, a great playground almost, just to try these different things with these players and really be creative and not make mistakes and learn and all this, and just develop as a practitioner myself, as well as obviously trying to help the players. So I was there for a few years. And then as I actually just got my accreditation and was starting to think about moving on, the club this time was still technically amateur. Was looking to maybe move on to a more professional outfit, and such an opportunity came up at Leicester City Women. One of the people there had been at Nottingham Forest previously when I'd done my internship, so it was a really key connection. I think I honestly don't know if I would have got the role without knowing him beforehand. And initially was just in for a few months as a short-term cover, but that became obviously longer and longer. I've been over there just over 2 years now. And yeah, I think that brings us up to date. So by no means set out to end up working in professional women's sport. Certainly once I had that internship with the men's team, what's it now, 5-6 years ago, longer now, 7-8 years ago, that gave me the taste of where I wanted to end up, wanted to be in professional sport. And I clearly remember the first few days when I started Leicester City Women, being in that full-time professional environment. It was very exciting. I really was like, wow, this is happened now. Ironically now, actually, I've looked, we'll be moving on in a couple of months into a different chapter. The idea of what is the dream scenario has changed as I guess got older, and new priorities and things change. So I'm sure we'll probably move on to that. But yeah, I think that brings us up to date.
Well, that's exciting. And it's great that I think this just underlines the fact that creating a network of professionals and getting to put your hand out there and meet people within our industry really is a key in creating more opportunity for yourself. Now, with the women, or help educate me a little bit, because I do follow Premier League. I don't follow Women's League very much, but it would seem like you've got Aston Villa coming up on Sunday. I think that's your most recent match. By the time this airs, of course, the match that'll be done, and I'll hope you be victorious, obviously. But it seems like all of the men's Premier teams have also a women's team as well. Is that pretty common these days?
Yes, I think that's about right. I'm trying to think of the teams in our league. I think so in our league there are 12 teams. It's the Women's Super League. That's the men equivalent of the Premier League. I think all of the 12 teams in our league, their men's team are Premier League teams as well. It's not always been the case. I remember last year there was Bristol City and they're a championship side. And going back, I think over the years it would have looked different. But I think all the teams currently in the men's Premier League, their women's teams, I think off the top of my head now, will be within the top 3 leagues, say, of the top women's teams.
And do you surmise that because of the Women's World Cup being relatively young itself, is that what has inspired a growth within women's sports as it relates to football/soccer?
I think so. I think the Women's Super League, I'm trying to think now, it's been professional, I want to say maybe 10 years, maybe just over 10 years. And I think a lot of the growth of the game in this country has been down to the national team's success.
Mm.
So the women's team won the European Championship a few years ago now, and that was seen as a very key moment. And obviously the most recent World Cup, they reached the final. So they're a successful team. And that's got a lot of attention. And certainly you come to Women's Super League games in this country, the England players, the fans go crazy for them. They draw a lot of attention. They get a lot of attention. So think the national team has helped massively with that. Obviously, from what I understand, like in America, it happened too. Was it the '99 World Cup or something? They won, and obviously America's women's football was streaks ahead of the rest of the world for so long, and it's only the last 5 or so years, 5, 10 years that the rest of the world's caught up. So maybe England's going through a similar phase of right. They've had some national team success and things are picking up, and go further down into the academies. Like a lot of players that say play senior professional football in this country, if they're even like mid-20s, maybe even early 20s onwards, like they haven't maybe had much of their academy. It's not the same as a men's player. Like they haven't had like 10 years or so in academy and end up turning professional. Like everyone will have loads of different stories. Whereas I think you now look in 10 years' time, all the players would have gone through an academy, because the academy structure is growing year on year. And
Well,
also,
excuse me, but that's exactly why I was asking, is that the maturity within the strength conditioning realm of women's sports is still relatively young, obviously, compared to men's sports. And the fact that your team is multinational, you've got several players that are not, I'll say, just British born, but they're coming in from all over, where it varies. Some of your players are probably experiencing strength conditioning maybe for the first time, or they're experiencing your approach quite differently than how they had been raised, whether it were in an academy or not. So how is that for you as a strength conditioning coach, performance coach for this women's club? What are I know what your main priorities are, but how do you get them with this group of players that vary so much in their experience with strength conditioning?
yeah, you're 100% right. A lot of players who do come in, there's such a variety of experience, both in terms of strength and conditioning and what they're used to training wise. And obviously, when they sign, they'll go through the proper medical, they'll go through some testing. But conversations I had with them as well, just like what do you normally do? What does your typical training week look like? What S&C work have you done? Like just simple questions like that to understand, right, what are you used to? And then depending on what they say and what their histories may be medically in terms of injuries and stuff, we'll then look to phase them into what our normal training week looks like. So I mean, we've obviously made a few sort of mid-season signings, and we're obviously in our full flow of training, preparing for games. But some of these players who've joined have maybe just had their off season, or they're in a very different time of year. So we just get an understanding of, right, what are you used to, what have you been doing, and then sometimes it's a case of, right, okay, maybe manage you in certain parts of training, maybe just do part of the session and bring out just to help build you in. Sometimes it might be, okay, you've done it quite a bit, we're confident to throw you in a little bit more. And sometimes we go the opposite way and scale it right back. So it's a very much an individualized approach to player and their history. Unfortunately, we get good vibe from the coaches of like what we feel is best. And obviously, ultimately, we're trying to bed them in safely and get them as soon as possible. But yeah, a large part of that is that safe element and getting them in. And once they are into the flow of things, then by all means, they're definitely not just jumping straight on the same S&C program someone who's been doing it for 10 years has. It still remains that individualized approach. And like, what do they need? And some of them, they're very raw. They haven't had much experience. It's just like, make sure you're moving well. Then we'll start to yeah, it varies massive. But it's great. It's great working with so many different nationalities, some great personalities, and you learn so much from them. It's great.
Do you set it up within like the weight room or even on the pitch, wherever you're doing your strength and conditioning? Do you set it up where the more veteran players or those that have more experience with S&C, where they'll be somewhat of a captain or a leader, or do you partner them up with those less experienced? Like, how do you do it within? Because you've got 30 players on your roster, as far as I know. Now, not all of them may be actually on squads. They could be borrowed off but out of the ones that you have on a regular basis, how do you manage the inner workings of the trainings with the players themselves? Is that something that you do?
I see what I mean. Programs they're given, there's not too much of an idea of pairing up or putting in groups, say.
Okay.
Then the sessions, typically the way our week works, a group might be split in two. One group might go and do some analysis or video work and then do their gym session and vice versa. And the way the two groups split aren't anything to do with gym experience or anything like that. But no, I think we're fortunate. I was just chatting with our S17 coach today. Like, there's a good culture. Like today and this morning, I remember just noticing like the girls just come in and crack on. Like they're really good, and I think it helps as well when a new player comes in and they see everyone just cracking all their work. If they've got any questions or not sure why, they'll ask. But they go and do the work, which I think is maybe sort of contagious for any new player coming in and saying, "Oh right, I better just crack on my work as well." So it's really easy to see.
Got it. Okay. So good insight with that. Now, you've been there for some time, and anywhere we go, we are able to pick up chunks of information, insight, knowledge, education, experience. What are some of the bigger elements? What are the bigger things that your experience with Leicester City has given you that you can take with you into the future?
Good question. I think communication has been a massive one. As a obvious beforehand, like the experience I had, say, with the Forest women's team. Like I said, I was the only physical coach there. There was me and one other physio, and most of the time that was it. So I was used to mostly just sort of speaking with her or and with the head coach. But then suddenly coming to Leicester, it's then a wider department. Like there's about two physical coaches, there's three physios, and there's a head coach, but then there's lots of other coaches as well and analysis. So understanding that the vital importance of communication and being clear on, be it GPS targets for the day or the expectations of certain players, whatever it may be. Typically, when things don't go well, it's often because the communication has fallen down somewhere, and that's the reason why poor outcome. So that's the first thing that comes to mind is idea of communication, speaking up early on things as well. Like if you say, "Oh, just raise it sooner rather than later."
Cool.
Communication.
Gotcha. So then, on the opposite side of it, what are the not I mean, we all learn from experiences and from mistakes and failures and not to ask those type of questions, but what are the biggest challenges that you have come is it the same answer? Communication, is that the biggest challenge as well? Or is there something else like integrating some element of sports science or maybe communicating with the athletes, getting the buy-in? Where do you find the most challenge with your role?
For me, and it's more of a personal one because I'm naturally quite shy and introverted. So I'll naturally be one of the quieter ones. So when it comes to maybe speaking up or challenging something, I'm quite hesitant. So in one of my roles of say prescribing say, like GPS loads for when we're training, this is how much we need to do. If maybe load isn't quite as we have planned or it's not quite on track, it's working out how to obviously respectfully raise this with the coaches. And that's something internally I sometimes struggle with is I don't want to go and trouble them, like they know what they're doing and they need to make sure they're getting all the tactical work in. So that's I think some things I always that's the challenge I find is challenging them obviously respectfully and thinking, right, how do I get this point across? And at the end of the day, though, I'm not fully aware that ultimately we can make recommendations, but there are people who are in charge of making those. Thank you so much.
Certainly. Okay, so I would love to geek out a little bit with GPS because you've mentioned it a couple times now, and I'm always curious where you get your, I won't, I guess we'll call it a standard. Where you get the ideal numbers? How is it you extrapolate that these players? based on their GPS? Like, what, first of all, what are you looking for? How do you determine if it's too much or not enough? Where do you find the Goldilocks spot, and how does that carry on?
So I guess there's two contexts this might be used in. So the first one is just the general sort of fit training squad. So our week schedule is quite consistent. Like each training day is similar week to week, so we can get an idea of what each day typically looks like, both at a team level and then obviously at an individual level. So when we go week to week, if someone suddenly does a little bit more than usual, then it sort of raises flags and say, right, let's just keep an eye on this person's sprint distance. Obviously, they have the match, and that can be the most variable of outputs. It's depending on how long a player plays, and if a game is very transitional, they do a lot more against sprint distance than normal. So when looking at the squad, it's often seeing, right, what's like often think of it as like a floor and a ceiling. Like what's the minimum we'd want them to be doing to maintaining good chronic load, but then what's like the maximum what we'll do. If they go above that maximum, they get a little bit nervous around obviously spikes and that carrying a greater injury risk. So they're the main sort of concepts we look at, and then cross metrics such as mentioned, speed, general total distance, and things around accelerations and decelerations. So sort of keeping an eye across those across the week, and then where possible, if someone has gone slightly higher than is ideal, looking at ways of modifying them. And then in another context, there's the rehabs. So again, that information of what a player typically does in a training session, then also in a match, that can then inform the rehab process. Once a player is coming back out on the grass, they're going through some sessions, they're getting close, rejoining training. We can use that information to say, right, okay, what is a typical large area session? Say, right, can we try and hit those numbers from the volume? Obviously, it's still very different to actually training, but if we can get there from a volume perspective first, then obviously the intensity follows. Often it's in terms of using benchmarks, I guess, in a way, it's the players' data from training sessions, from matches, and then that can inform, right, how do things look going forward in those two contexts.
Okay, so you typically have like a midweek match and a weekend match, correct? Like it's either Wednesday or Thursday, and then you've got another one sometime on the weekend, typically like a Sunday.
Typically, it's just Sunday to Sunday.
Oh, Sunday to Sunday. Oh,
Typically,
that's
yeah,
much easier.
yeah, no, yeah, it helps massively. We do have a few midweek games for cup games, but usually not more than 3 or 4 in the season. So yeah, we're quite fortunate in that regard.
Oh, so when it comes to volume, work volume, and load, especially when we're talking GPS, I'm curious about the approach that different teams take. Some will be very aggressive and they will create volume higher than match day so that the players have a much easier time, theoretically, that when match day comes around, it's not as hard as, say, during the week at like match day -2. But then there's other organizations that will do sub match volume so that the match itself they don't want to overtax. They think there's too much workload, too much volume, which will lead to fatigue and a higher likelihood of injury. So I'm just curious, where do you, Marcus, like, where do you fall in that? Because I don't know if anybody truly has the answer. I'm sure research and statistics will back up whichever side wants to espouse the virtues of their approach. But where do you fall?
So let's say for in either camp, I think in terms of relative to a game, for me, intensity is a key one. Like, are we hitting intensities similar to that, or actually the rest of the game to help be prepared for things like worst case scenarios is a common term used in demands there. I think volume wise, yeah, I can't say that it's what we set right. This week we're going to try and complete, I don't know, 250% of total distance. I usually I more work in the absolute terms. I mentioned, like, if a player typically does, I'll make something up 26 kilometers in a week, for example. It's trying to be close to that range, rather than speaking absolute terms. Within a session, we'd look at absolute terms. Like, yes, we'll look at across the team the average high speed running output, for example. But within that, you've got, say, the wingers who will typically also do more in a game, and say centre backs who will typically do less. So we'd look at it relative to that. Certainly, like if a centre back is suddenly doing loads of sprinting, that obviously is going to raise a flag. But yeah, on the whole, typically when it comes to the monitoring side and comparing to matches, it's more the absolute terms rather than the relative game. That's how I've operated. But I've sort of seen wherever like the research out there that talks about this is like the golden spot. But I haven't looked into that personally.
Yeah. Oh, well said though. So with the different levels of athletes that you have and the different stages that they're in, you've got some that are more in the acute rehab phase, others are in kind of transitioning to RTP, and others are fully into performance. I'm sure you create some parameters in regards to work volume. And we don't have to necessarily stay with GPS, but it's a great measuring tool, obviously. I'm sure you must do some force plate work, counter jump movements, something of that nature to establish where a person is and along that spectrum. But in terms of work volume, do you set up specific gateways that each athlete must meet as they progress back onto the pitch in regards to recovering from injury and return to play and so on?
Yeah, again, because it's what I use the most. If you sort of find it, yes, it's that. Yeah, certain I guess ticks along the way would be right. They've completed the equivalent of this training session, or they've completed the equivalent of 30 minutes of match, 45 minutes. Speed is another one we look at. So 90% of their max speed is sort of our go-to measure for that, both for fit players and players coming back. So have they hit that? Are they doing it? Like we're looking at like pairs of days. Are they doing it on back-to-back days? Are they covering how much they like doing back-to-back days of training? And there's obviously that being progressed appropriately. So yeah, there's a few sort of ticks along the way. I think, and often when we have so when there's a return to when a player has like the first, what there might be their first game, date of their potential first game, it's sort of working back from that. So right, what if they're going to be available for 30 minutes? Say right, what's that going to look? Obviously, they're going to be training fully that week. So what's that going to look like? I'm working back from that and making sure like going from taking steps appropriate, purely based on obviously numbers, but then within that you've got the actual movement skills. So obviously starting straight line running and direction, and typically where I might start to come in is the ball gets involved, and you're talking about reactions, the ball, contact, how they phase into training, being on contact, being exposed to those peak demands, like I mentioned before, done a couple of drills with players, and it's about right. This drill's 3 minutes long, and we're trying to hit your 3-minute max output for the game. Bit of like sprinting up and down, crossing, shooting, just again all that pairing and pushing on and bridging that gap to the game. So yeah, a few sort of tick boxes along the way. So
Right on. Okay. And then the elephant in the room would be to ask if there is much difference between genders in regards to strength conditioning, a men's team versus a women's team. What considerations, if any, do you take when designing your programs? Are there certain screening or assessments or protocols that are more gender specific?
I think things that I've done previously, and obviously quite widely known about the risk of knee injuries in females in sport. Ankle injuries, just from research, obviously, is another common one. So I think it's like if you start working in any sport, you do your needs analysis, you learn about what the sport are and what the most common injuries are. And I think it's then making sure you're looking specifically at female football. Male football is different. So when I've done that, it's been knee injuries, it's been ankle injuries. So it's been obviously finding appropriate things for that, and then training appropriately for that. So in terms of knee injuries, some work around making sure you're doing more posterior chain than anterior chain exercises, doing perfect work around the ankle in terms of balance work, proprioception around calves. Again, landing mechanics, obviously, with females as well around the knee, other ones. So there's sort of things looked at in the past, certainly. When
Is there a higher incident rate then with women, with female football players? You're going to have a higher incident rate of knees compared to men, or is there? Because commonly, what we're talking with men's football, it's usually hamstrings, maybe groin, and of course ankles. Uh, but it or I'm sure ACLs are up there. Is there a higher incident rate as far as you know toward like ACLs or meniscal issues or tibial plateau issues, whatever it is, with women compared to men?
From what I've read and from what I understand and hear, the risk is typically greater for females. I think the debate maybe lies how much greater that risk is as the numbers get pulled out. And I think a lot of it is just down to sort of anatomy and physiology. It's how things are, unfortunately. There is I think I'm saying a greater risk. But then there might be injuries for males. They're a greater risk than females, I'm sure.
All right. And then, so you mentioned focusing a little bit more on the posterior chain or on the anterior chain. What are your go-to movements if you do have any? I mean, obviously, there's a whole bunch of ways you can load the posterior chain, but do you have some that not necessarily specific to the sport itself, but carry over quite well from the weight room or the pitch? How do you reinforce and bulletproof the body as best you can?
The I don't know if it's called different things elsewhere, but the glute ham raise machine I've used
Okay.
before when growing and really like as a great way of just activating the glutes. Hip thrust is another one that's been well, I say popular. My previous club, it was a very popular exercise. I don't think it is quite so much at Leicester. But they're also Nordics are a common thing in their programs. That's what they're given. Some will be on the RDLs as well. So they're sort of the more common exercises around
That makes sense. That seems pretty standard and typical. Anything that's atypical that you find has a place that perhaps it's not conventional? Do you have any non-conventional things that you've found that, oh, this carries over, whether it was you borrowed it from cricket or elsewhere?
Nothing that springs to mind. No. On the whole, tend to keep it quite simple. Nothing anything too outlandish that we try.
Okay. Then for just humor me for a moment and teach me a little bit about a sport I know nothing about, and that is one of the top three most populous sports on the planet, and that would be cricket. I will say that it hasn't carried over with the popularity in the States here, perhaps because of baseball. I don't really know, but not like soccer/football has. I mean, we've got teams in every little town across the country, in every state, and so on. I myself have coached football, AKA soccer, for numerous years for my kids growing up in organized sports and so on. But when it comes to cricket, we could spend, I'm sure, many episodes in you giving me a tutorial on it. But the basics of cricket, essentially, how have you taken your experience with that sport and carried it over to where you are now?
Um, I guess, well, as I said, cricket was the sport I enjoyed most growing up. So I guess that's where where I've played the most. Never worked in it. Um, in terms of from a lessons perspective, I remember doing a little bit of at uni, doing a little bit of testing with some players, which again in itself was a good experience being around professional professional athletes. But yeah, I'm trying to think of any translations from a playing time. Well, actually, coaching wise, actually, it's probably a point. It's like, it was the main sport I actually coached as well. Like, obviously, was playing, but my dad was one of the coaches at the club I played at, and as I was getting to the back end of the junior section, starting to do a bit of senior cricket, also go along and help do some coaching as well for younger ones. So actually, that was the first coaching I've had, doing cricket coaching with really young kids, and we've done that for a good few years. So without probably realizing at the time, and then maybe not even now, like just that first exposure to helping others with their bowling, with their batting, with their fielding, and it's being a sport that I have some competence in. I think that's maybe the start of that journey. And I actually remember very clearly one moment of, I think a lot of reasons why we get into coaching is helping improve. I do remember one moment of helping someone with something, make a suggestion. This is like a very young 8-year-old or something like that, very young. Tried this, I can't remember what the skill was, might have been bowling or something. Made a suggestion, she does it, and the outcome was very positive and just got a great big smile on her face. And it's like those little things which obviously as a coach you very much you enjoy, like those moments where you know you've helped someone, they feel the benefits of it. So I remember that, and yeah, that would be the start, I guess, of the journey, being in cricket itself, and all the little things you pick up, just that experience, which, as I say, you don't really think about or realize at the time, but further down the line, it becomes more natural, I guess, and realize.
Right on. Excellent. So, is that something that you might pursue in the future too, like actual sport coaching, whether it be cricket,
Mm.
football, or otherwise? Or are you kind of entrenched into the world of sports science, strength conditioning?
Honest answer, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe one day. Maybe one day. So I'm moving on from Leicester in a couple of months, but still going to be in that sort of S&C sports science space, still sort of supporting people more individually with their strength work and conditioning. Um, and yeah, I don't. I think one thing I do like about more the sports science and strength conditioning is the variety, obviously, of sports and athletes you can work with, and that always like keeps you on your toes of having to learn more about different things. Maybe if doing sports coaching, particularly if you're in one sport, it's maybe not quite as diverse. Don't get me wrong, um, but I think that the S&C side of so you learn about the body and how it moves and the energy systems and all that, and then applying that in different contexts. I think that's something I quite like, is that understanding around the why of things, basic anatomy level, and then applying that to sport and their performance. So yeah, I've not no plans per se to move into sports coaching, but who knows?
What about influences, whether they be mentors or just a path that you're studying right now based on somebody else's work? Or where do your eyes turn these days for your continuing education?
Um, well, I've been had a mentor now for just over 2 years, a guy called Josh Fletcher. Um, heard him speak at the UKCA conference, and just dropped a message on LinkedIn. We had a chat, and he's been mentoring me for a bit years, and so the conversations become very work related, very job related, but now it can be much more holistic and about life and relationships. Sometimes it turns into more therapy sessions. So he's been a massive influence on me, both personally and professionally. Like I, yeah, it's no exaggeration to say I don't know where I'd be or what I'd be doing right now if it wasn't if I'd been working with him. Might not have got the Leicester role, might not have maintained it, and who knows. So been really fortunate to have his last 2.5 years now almost. Beyond him, in terms of education, I'm quite into the podcasts, sort of like it's the typical on the drive into work or something. So the basic podcast is a classic one. I'm very important in school. And actually, when I think about just people I work with, I think learn so much from them. Like fortunate to be in a really good department of like a mixture of like very experienced practitioners, but also fairly young, but thorough, professional in what they do, very knowledgeable in what they do and how we operate together and the conversations we have. Um, you can learn quite a bit of them, both in terms of like knowledge wise, but also seeing how they interact with people, so-called soft skills and people work and operate with that. Not just obviously then the practitioners in our department, then the actual coaches, like seeing them coach and how they work with people. So just the people I've worked with, really, I'd say over the last how many years, so they've shaped and I've taken bits from them and learned a lot from them, both personally and professionally.
Beautiful. Ah, well, then you say you're moving on in a matter of months and
Mm.
moving on to other pastures. Hopefully, they'll be as green as the one you're leaving now. But uh, when it comes to these type of transitions in your life, I often think of them with such extreme contrasting emotions. The large things in our life, whether it's uh, graduating school, finding a career, getting married, having children, buying a home, starting a business. These are all combating emotions that I'll coin fearful over joy. There's such ecstatic excitement and dreaded fear or apprehension. So I imagine you can relate to this. And what I'm wondering is, how do you how do you relate with that? How do you kind of hold that yourself? It's not a question I often ask people, but whereas you've mentioned this, I'm just curious from one guy to another, how is it that you're working through this?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There's been a mixture too. I think it's so one of my personal values is explore and like exploring what life has to offer ultimately. And sort of being part of this decision is to try different things, to try new things. Um, I've only worked in football, um, and the last 2.5 years of Leicester has been amazing, and professionally, personally, the experiences offered. Um, just feels time to try something different. Um, so the idea of exploring and trying different things that feeds obviously that excitement. Yes, that there is that nerves of leaving a full-time, well-paid job, and I guess the security that that can bring. But it definitely feels at the moment, and it has since I made that decision that the excitement is definitely outweighed the fear or the nerves. And I think I feel comfortable with it because I know why I've made a decision. I know it's right for me. It's not just about professionally; it's about personally as well. Because obviously, working in professional sport, it's not always the most sociable of working hours and such and weekends. So for me, it's been very much about, and going back to my mentor Josh, he used this phrase of rather than thinking of what your dream job is, like well, how do you want life to be, and make work find a job that fits around that. So I've really taken that on board. I thought, like, how do I want life to be, and what work would fit around that. So for me, it's like simple things of weekends free just to sort of socialize more and see friends and family, and working in professional football is difficult to get that. So it's been very much like I guess a lifestyle decision, not just a professional decision. To think, right, by going into this world of more of self-employment, of more casual and part-time work, it's I will have to hopefully the flexibility to fit any work around the life I want to have. So that's been yeah the major part of the decision, and the excitement of that again has outweighed it because it's I know why I made that decision, I know the reasons. It's exciting to see where it could lead because anything could come out like well the Leicester job came up out of nowhere and anything else could just come out of nowhere. So having now the freedom because when you're contracted in one particular club you can't really go off and do other stuff. But as now I have this policy always to say right oh, let's go and try this. And it might be something, oh, I actually really enjoy that, but that's okay. It's just trying different things. That's again that explore part.
Fantastic. I love it. I really like that approach too, of rather than going for an event or an object, but looking at the quality of your life, and by forming that quality of life as that you dream of, then all those other things will start to appear most likely. So that's great. So, Marcus, again, it always, when I'm embroiled into a really engaging conversation, time has a way of going faster than I realize. So we're getting kind of near the end here, and I'm curious. We connected on LinkedIn, and I think it's one of the best tools out there in regards to connecting with a network of colleagues that become friends over time, and just opens up opportunities. So, but aside from LinkedIn, are there other places where people could follow your pursuit? Do you have a website, or do you do any kind of social media? Should somebody want to reach out to you that has been intrigued by your story?
LinkedIn is probably number one for now. In a couple of months' time, once I've left and I've got my own business going a bit more, I'll be more present in terms of social media and a website and such. I do have Instagram. But yeah, LinkedIn would be probably number one. And from there, happy to share email, number, and have conversations with other coaches. Because yeah, completely agree. It's great to connect with all sorts of coaches. And you can learn so much regardless of their environment and everything. There's so much to learn from other people. So yeah, very happy to reach out to other people. Conversations.
Well, it's been a pleasure for me. I can't thank you enough. This has been great. And well, if nothing else, I wish you well for the remainder of the season. Good luck against Aston Villa this weekend, as well as green pastures will be in your future for wherever your life takes you, I'm sure. So thank you for coming on.
Thank you very much. Great.
Boom. And just like that, we're at the end of the episode. Marcus, I can't thank you enough for coming on. And Leicester City Women's Football Club, thanks for making this happen. Remember, you can go to my website, rockysnyder.com, for CEUs with the NSCA, the BOC, APTA, and for that matter, the Board of Chiropractic Examiners. So if you're needing some CEUs, check it out. Also, be sure to check out my book. I just got to put in one more tag for that. Return to Center. If you're looking to align the body through strength training, maybe that's where you want to check it out. Check out SatantaCollege.com before we see you next week. Have a good one.